Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take really big, sometimes kind of head-spinning topics and really distill them down for you. Today, it's a concept so vast it almost feels like it could swallow ethics whole. Infinity.
Yeah, this is a big one. And it's, super relevant for anyone tracking modern moral philosophy. We're digging into long-termism, this idea that the far, far future is what really counts and what happens when it crashes right into the maths, really, of infinite value.
The whole structure of how we even think about value, axiology, it's on the line here.
Pretty much. The foundations get shaky.
Okay, let's set the stage. Long-termism, we've touched on it before, but the basic idea, the core thesis, is that what we do now, the choices we make, the things we build or regulate their moral value, comes mostly from how they might affect the really distant future. Why?
Well, it boils down to scale, doesn't it? It's fundamentally a numbers game. If humanity manages to not wipe itself out in the near term, avoids the big existential risks like engineered pandemics or all-out nuclear war.
Which is a big if.
A very big if. But if we do, then human-originating civilization could potentially last for an unbelievable amount of time. Millions, maybe billions of years, spreading out using vast resources.
So you end up with just this potentially astronomical number of future people.
Exactly. An enormous number, as the sources put it. And long-termism says, look, if that huge number of people is likely, and if our actions now can slightly change their chances of existing, or how well their lives go,
then those tiny effects, multiplied by that enormous number, just outweigh anything happening in our lifetime.
That's the argument. The cumulative effect could swamp near-term consequences. So the prescription becomes focus on reducing existential risk now, because the future stakes are just astronomically higher.
But, okay, for those future stakes to count just as much as present stakes, long-termism needs a specific way to calculate moral value, and that's this framework, risk-neutral totalism.
That's the engine driving the most straightforward version of long-termism. Yeah. And it runs on three key premises, non-negotiable premises, really.
Okay, what are they?
First up is additivity. Basically, the total value of some outcome, like the state of the universe at a point in time, is just the sum total of the values at all the different value locations.
Value locations like people. Or maybe sentient AI, conscious animals, anything that can experience well-being.
Precisely. Could be persons, could be any morally relevant subject experiencing welfare. If you've got 10 happy people, the total value is just, 10 units of happiness added up. Simple sum.
So value scales linearly, which lets that potentially enormous future population dominate the calculation.
It does. And then second, and this one is absolutely crucial, impartiality. It says every single value location gets the exact same weight in that sum. Doesn't matter where or when it exists.
Okay, pause there. That sounds noble, impartial, but that's the bit that really pushes the moral focus away from us here and now, right?
It absolutely is.
To really buy into long-termism via this route, you have to accept that, say, saving one person today versus slightly increasing the chance of billions living well a million years from now. They have to be weighed completely impartially. No temporal discount.
Exactly. It demands we override our natural bias towards the present, towards what feels immediate. The suffering of someone a billion years from now weighs exactly the same as suffering next door.
Wow. Okay. And the third premise?
Risk neutrality. This tackles the massive uncertainty. Obviously, predicting the far future is incredibly speculative. So risk neutrality says that the value of a risky choice, like investing in asteroid defense, is its expected value. You multiply the value of each possible outcome by its probability and sum those up.
Right. So the classic example, if my action has a tiny, tiny chance, 1 in a million, say, of preventing human extinction, the value of that outcome, saving potentially trillions of future lives, is so immense that even multiplied by that tiny probability, the expected value calculation tells me that's my top moral priority. It dwarfs saving a definite 100 lives today.
That's precisely how the argument works. And look, if the future is just vast, incredibly big, but ultimately finite, then risk-neutral totalism provides a mathematically sound, coherent justification for long-termism.
But that if is doing a lot of work there.
It is. Because our mission in this deep dive is to wrestle with what happens when leading cosmological theories suggest the future isn't just vast, it might actually be infinite.
And that possibility, that mathematical infinity, it threatens to just pull the rug out from under this whole logical framework.
Completely. It potentially shatters the foundation. That's what we need to explore.
Okay, so that threat brings us to the core of the problem. Part 2, the axiological breakdown. What happens to our moral sums when infinity enters the picture?
Right. First, we need to get why this isn't just like a philosopher's abstract game anymore, why infinity is a real contender.
Yeah.
Leading cosmological models, especially things like the inflationary paradigm, which is pretty mainstream, they suggest the universe might be spatially infinite right now. Or maybe the process of cosmic inflation just keeps going forever, churning out new regions of space, effectively creating an infinite future that contains infinitely many places where value or disvalue could happen, infinitely many potential value locations.
So the totalist adding machine, which works fine with big finite numbers, suddenly gets fed a potentially limitless number. What's the immediate problem?
It leads straight to what the sources call the nihilistic threat to totalism. It's a stark conclusion. If the universe already contains infinite value, maybe infinite happiness, maybe infinite suffering, maybe an infinite mix of both.
Which seems plausible if space or time is infinite.
Exactly. Then, what happens when our actions only produce finite effects? Saving a life, preventing a war, building a school. These are finite changes in value.
Okay, let me try to picture this. Imagine the universe's total moral score is already infinity, and I perform some heroic act, maybe I save a whole city, 1,000,000 lives. That's a huge finite positive addition. What's infinity plus 1,000,000?
Still infinity.
And infinity minus the negative value of, say, a terrible disaster.
Still infinity. The terrifying mathematical truth, if you accept this framework rigidly, is that nothing we do can actually change the total, impartially weighted sum of value in an infinite universe.
Wait, so saving 1,000,000 lives, or, for that matter, causing 1,000,000 deaths, finite changes, they make literally zero difference to the grand cosmic total.
If the total is already infinite, mathematically, yes. That's the implication.
It feels wrong.
Yeah.
Deeply wrong. It feels nihilistic. If our actions don't change the total score, does that mean they don't matter, axiologically speaking?
That's the apparent nihilistic implication and is profoundly paralyzing. If you stick strictly to additivity and impartiality in an infinite universe, you seem forced to conclude our finite actions are morally irrelevant on the grandest scale. This is why just naively applying the finite rules doesn't work.
And this isn't the only problem, right? There's also an issue with risk and expected value, the undefined expectation problem.
Yes, that's the second hammer blow. If the universe contains infinite value, then calculating the expected value of our actions often goes haywire too.
How so?
Where often the expected total value of all our possible choices comes out as infinite. Or sometimes it's just mathematically undefined. You get things like infinity minus infinity, which doesn't have a clear answer.
So imagine option A is save 5 people. If the background universe is infinite, the total expected value might calculate out to infinity. And option B is do nothing, maybe even something terrible, kill 5 people. That also might calculate out to infinite expected value because those 5 finite lives are just drops in an infinite ocean.
Precisely. If both options yield infinite expected value, then risk-neutral totalism gives us absolutely no guidance. It can't distinguish between saving lives and taking them if both actions are embedded in an infinite background value. How do you choose between infinity and infinity?
You can't. It breaks the choice mechanism.
Which really shows the failure of what we're calling naive risk-neutral totalism, just trying to plug infinity into the old equations without modification.
Right. It assumes the rules just scale up, but they don't.
Exactly. And there's a classic thought experiment that really drives this home. Imagine comparing 2 possible infinite outcomes for the universe. Let's call them outcome A and outcome B.
Okay, let's describe them simply.
Imagine an infinite line of people stretching out forever. In outcome A, every single person in that infinite line gets, say, 1 unit of happiness. The total value, it's 1 plus 1 plus 1 forever. That's infinite happiness.
Got it. Infinite total value.
Now, outcome B, same infinite line of people, same locations. But this time, every single person gets 2 units of happiness. Double the happiness for everyone, everywhere, forever. The total value is 2 plus 2 plus 2 forever, which is also infinite happiness.
But wait, intuitively, outcome B is vastly, undeniably better than outcome A, right? Everyone is twice as happy.
Absolutely. Any sane moral theory should say B is better than A. But naive totalism looks at the totals. Infinity for A, infinity for B. It concludes they are equally good.
That's absurd.
It's the knockout blow. If your theory can't tell the difference between everyone having 1 unit of happiness and everyone having 2 units, just because the number of people is infinite, then the theory is broken. It's useless for guiding choices, especially if it also can't register finite changes like saving a life.
So the naive approach fails spectacularly. We need something smarter. We need philosophical tools that can handle infinity without leading to nihilism or absurdity.
Exactly. We need a way to rescue the core ideas, additivity, impartiality, risk neutrality, but make them work even when infinity is on the table.
Okay, so the simple sum breaks down. We need more sophisticated tools. This brings us to section 3. Philosophical tools for infinite worlds, the rescue attempt.
Right. The goal isn't to ditch totalism entirely, at least not yet. It's to see if we can extend its spirit, keep additivity, impartiality, risk neutrality somehow, but refine the math so give sensible answers in infinite situations.
And the main tool, the first big idea philosophers reached consensus on, is called the sum of differences, or SOD.
That's the one. It sounds technical, but the core idea is actually quite intuitive.
Okay, break it down. What does SOD let us do that the naive sum couldn't?
It lets us compare two infinite outcomes. Let's call them O1 and O2 again. But instead of trying to sum all the value in each one, we only sum the differences in value, location by location.
So for each person or each value location, we see how much better or worse off they are in O1 compared to O2, and then we add up those differences.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. This only works, SOD only gives us an answer if that sum of differences actually converges to a finite number. If it adds up to something meaningful, not just infinity or undefined.
Let's revisit that thought experiment. Outcome A is infinite people with 1 happiness each. Outcome B is infinite people with 2 happiness each. How does SOD compare them?
Okay. We go location by location. Location 1, O2 has value 2, O1 is value 1. The difference O2, O1 is plus 1. Location 2, same thing, difference is plus 1. Location 3, difference plus 1, forever. The sum of differences is 1 plus 1 plus 1, infinitely.
So that sum is infinite. It doesn't converge to a finite number. So SOD doesn't directly help in that specific comparison. Or does it?
Well, it shows O2 is infinitely better than O1, which is arguably the right qualitative answer, even if the number is infinite. But where SOD really shines is when the differences are more localized.
Okay, modify the example. Let's say O1 and O2 are identical from person number 100 all the way out to infinity. They only differ for the first 99 people.
Perfect. So we calculate the difference at each location. For locations 100, 101, 102, and so on infinitely, the difference is 0 because the outcomes are identical there.
So the infinite tail just cancels out. 0 difference repeated infinitely is still 0 overall contribution to the sum of differences.
Precisely. So SOD allows us to effectively ignore the entire infinite part of the universe where the two outcomes are identical. We only need to sum the differences for the first 99 people, the finite set where things actually change.
And if that finite sum of differences is, say, positive,
then SOD declares that the outcome with the higher sum for those 99 people is the better outcome overall. It lets us focus on the part of the universe our actions actually affect, provided the effects are limited.
okay, that feels like a powerful rescue. It brings morality back to the finite realm for many choices. If my action prevents 5 deaths, and that's the only difference between 2 infinite futures, SOD lets us calculate the value preventing those 5 deaths and ignore the unchanged infinite background.
It restores the common sense idea that saving lives or improving finite situations actually matters morally. When 2 infinite outcomes differ at only finitely many locations, which seems true for most everyday moral choices, SOD lets us reason essentially as if we were in a finite world. It preserves the spirit of totalism where it counts.
That handles comparing definite outcomes. But long-termism is so much about risk, uncertainty, probabilities. How do we extend this difference idea to comparing risky prospects?
That's where the next principle comes in, the sum of value probability differences, or SVPD. It's essentially the risk-aware version of SO.
Okay, so instead of summing the difference in actual value at each location, we're summing the difference in expected value.
Basically, yes. It's a bit more complex mathematically. You're summing the differences in the probability of realizing certain values at each location, weighted by those values. But the core idea is the same.
And the crucial condition holds. It only works if this more complicated sum of differences also converges to a well-defined finite number.
That's the key constraint again. SVPD is generally accepted by philosophers working on this because it gives us the same practical benefit as SED, but for choices under uncertainty.
Meaning?
Meaning if you have 2 risky options, 2 prospects, and they lead to the exact same probabilities of outcomes for all locations except for a finite set.
Then SEPD lets us ignore the infinitely many locations where the prospects are identical.
Exactly. We can focus our comparison only on the finite set of locations where our choice actually changes the probabilities of different outcomes. It allows us to ignore vast swaths of the universe that are statistically unaffected by our decision.
So SOD and SVPD seem like essential tools. They let totalism function, provided our actions only make a difference in a finite part of the world or affect probabilities finitely.
That's the big proviso. They rescue totalism from the easy cases of infinity. The question then becomes, is that assumption true in the real world, especially for the kinds of choices long-termism cares most about?
Which leads us squarely into the next section. Can we actually ignore real-world infinities? The success of SOD and SVPD depends on our actions having only finite reach. Is that a safe assumption?
Well, for most of our day-to-day actions, probably yes. Physics seems to impose limits. The speed of light means our causal influence can only spread so far in a given time. And things like the eventual heat death of the universe suggest that the complex organized structures we can influence civilizations, ecosystems are ultimately finite in duration within our local cosmic horizon.
So the bit of the universe we can predictably affect looks finite. If that's true, then SOD and SVPD work, and maybe long-termism based on totalism is okay.
That would be the optimistic conclusion for near-term choices. But the universe, or at least our cosmological models of it, keeps throwing curveballs. There are these potential sources of infinite value or disvalue even within our causal future. First, there are the so-called easy infinities.
Ah, yes, the infamous Boltzmann brains.
Right. These are purely hypothetical entities. But some cosmological models, like certain versions of flat universes with a cosmological constant, predict that over infinite time, even after the universe has seemingly died out into a cold, empty vacuum,
random fluctuations in that vacuum could, just by sheer chance, spontaneously assemble complex structures, like a functioning brain, complete with thoughts and experiences.
Exactly. Or even, theoretically, whole planets or mini-civilizations popping into existence randomly from the quantum foam, only to dissolve again. These Boltzmann entities would represent a source of infinite value and disvalue infinite experiences happening purely by chance in the very, very deep future.
Okay, that sounds like an infinite background we can't ignore. Why are these considered easy infinities for our moral framework?
Because of SVPD, actually. The key is that these Boltzmann events are, by definition, products of pure random statistical fluctuation. They are cosmic background noise.
Meaning our actions now, building solar panels, writing philosophy papers, have absolutely no predictable causal effect on whether a Boltzmann brain pops up quadrillions of years after heat death.
Precisely. Our choices yield the exact same probability distribution for these random future events. Option A and Option B have the same, presumably zero, influence on the likelihood of any specific Boltzmann fluctuation.
So when we calculate the sum of value probability differences, SVPD, between Option A and Option B,
the difference contributed by all those infinitely many potential Boltzmann locations is zero. They fall out of the equation. SVPD allows us, quite elegantly, to ignore this statistically indifferent infinite background and focus only on the parts of the future where our actions do make a probabilistic difference.
Okay, that makes sense. Boltzmann brains, while weird, don't break the SVPD calculation if they're truly random and unaffected by us.
Right. But that brings us to the crux of the issue for long-termism, the harder infinities.
These are scenarios where our actions do seem to predictably affect the probabilities associated with infinitely many future locations.
Exactly. And critically, these scenarios often involve the very choices long-termism is most concerned about, namely, ensuring humanity's long-term survival and flourishing. The argument is that if we survive long enough, we might develop technologies that let us interact with infinity in a predictable, non-random way.
And that would break the SVPD assumption that the infinite part cancels out.
It potentially does, because the difference in probabilities across infinitely many locations might no longer sum to zero.
What are the main examples from the sources for these hard infinities?
Well, one major category involves hypotheses about cosmological natural selection or multiverse interactions. The idea is if humanity survives for, say, millions of years, maybe our descendants figure out how to create new baby universes in a lab, or how to send signals or influence events in other parallel universes within a larger multiverse.
Okay, that's pretty sci-fi, but theoretically possible within some physical models.
Right. And if our action today, say, successfully diverting an asteroid, increases the probability, even slightly, that humanity survives long enough to start creating new universes, potentially infinite ones,
then that single action has made a non-zero probabilistic difference to an infinite number of potential value locations in those future universes.
Precisely. The difference sum in SVPD might not converge. Another example, maybe even more mind-bending, is computational supertasks.
Tasks involving infinite steps completed in finite time. How is that even possible?
It relies on speculative physics, like manipulating spacetime or using exotic computational substrates. But the idea is that a sufficiently advanced civilization might perform computations involving literally infinite steps, perhaps simulating an infinite number of conscious minds or experiences within a finite physical time frame or region.
Wow, okay. And again, if our choices now affect the probability that humanity survives to perform such super tasks,
Then we're making a predictable, non-zero difference to the prospects of infinitely many simulated value locations. SVPD doesn't automatically rescue us here. The infinite terms in the sum might not vanish.
so the very actions long-termism champions securing the far future might be the ones that force us to confront infinite predictable effects, potentially breaking the SVPD tool that worked for near-term choices and Boltzmann brains.
That's the core dilemma. We're face to face with the possibility that our most important choices involve infinities that don't just cancel out.
Okay, this is the crucial point. Section 5. Infinite predictable effects and the looming threat of incomparability. If our choices can predictably influence infinite futures, like with super tasks or multiverse creation, what does that do to risk-neutral totalism and long-termism?
Well, there are two main possibilities, and they point in radically different directions. The first is that maybe, just maybe, a sophisticated extension of risk-neutral totalism can handle these cases. Maybe you can still compare options even when infinite predictable effects are involved.
And if it can make those comparisons?
Then it likely leads to a conclusion called infinite fanaticism. This would massively strengthen the case for long-termism.
Fanaticism, meaning the infinite possibilities just completely dominate everything else.
Essentially, yes. If the axiology can compare an option with a tiny chance of producing infinite good against an option guaranteeing finite good, the infinite prospect must win, according to risk neutrality.
So if I have a choice between, say, alleviating all current global poverty, a massive finite good, and taking an action that has a 1 in a billion chance of ensuring humanity survives to create an infinite utopia via super tasks.
Infinite fanaticism, driven by a working infinite totalist framework, would say you must choose the option aiming for the infinite utopia. The expected value of the infinite outcome, even discounted by a tiny probability, is still infinite, overwhelming any finite expected value.
Wow. So if this works, long-termism isn't just an important consideration, it becomes almost the only consideration, because any action affecting the probability of these infinite future scenarios just swamps all near-term finite concerns.
That's the potential implication. It would make the long-termist case incredibly strong, provided the underlying axiology holds up.
But there's a but. What if the framework can't make these comparisons? What if SVPD or its successors just break when faced with these hard infinities?
Then we face the second, and perhaps more likely, possibility: widespread incomparability.
Meaning we just can't rank the options. It's not that A is better than B or B is better than A, or even that they're equally good.
It's that they are fundamentally incomparable by the lights of the theory. The theory just goes silent. It offers no verdict.
And if this incomparability arises precisely for the most important long-term high-stakes decisions, the ones about survival, future values, potential super tasks,
then that's a devastating blow. It means that in the very moments where we most need moral guidance about the far future, the totalist framework fails to provide any. It violates the whole point of having a practical ethical theory.
Okay, let's look at the kinds of hard cases where SVPD seems to go silent, leading to this incomparability. The sources mention a few. Case 1, existence with mixed infinite value.
Right. Imagine you have a choice. Option A is the status quo. Option B slightly increases the probability, say, from 0% to 1%, that an infinite future population comes into existence.
Okay.
But crucially, this infinite future population isn't purely good. It contains both infinitely many lives that are genuinely worth living, positive value, and infinitely many lives filled with suffering, such that they are arguably worse than non-existence, negative value.
So it's an infinite mix of good and bad.
Exactly. Maybe the positive and negative infinities perfectly balance out, or maybe they don't in a way we can easily quantify. When you try to use SVPD to compare option B, 1% chance of this mixed infinity, with option A, 0% chance, you run into trouble. Because the expected difference calculation involves that 1% chance multiplied by infinite positives plus infinite negatives. This often results in an undefined mathematical form, like 0.01, infinity, infinity. SVPD just doesn't yield a clear answer. How do you weigh a small chance of a mixed infinite outcome against, say, a guaranteed finite good today? The theory is silent.
That seems like a fundamental problem for guiding choices about whether to, say, pursue risky colonization efforts that might enable such a future. Okay, case two, identity affecting choices.
This one digs into deep issues in population ethics. Here, your choice doesn't change the probability of an infinite future existing, or even the total amount of positive and negative value. Instead, it changes which specific individuals or value locations experience those lives.
Like choosing between policy X and policy Y both lead to an infinite future with the same overall statistics of happiness and suffering, but policy X results in infinite set of people A existing, while policy Y results in infinite set B existing where A and B are different sets of individuals.
Precisely. You're essentially swapping one infinite configuration of lives for another, potentially slightly different infinite configuration. Since the overall infinite totals might be the same, or the differences again lead to undefined sums, SVPD often can't rank these options. It requires making judgments about the value of specific identities existing, which totalism typically tries to avoid through anonymity principles.
And case three, shaping future values. This sounds particularly relevant to long-termism.
It is. Imagine your choice today influences the probability that a future infinite society adopts one set of values or institutions versus another. For example, choice 1 makes it slightly more likely they adopt a radically egalitarian system, maybe less total value but distributed equally. Choice 2 makes it slightly more likely they adopt a purely utilitarian system, maybe more total value, but with huge inequalities.
And each system might be better for infinitely many people and worse for infinitely many others compared to the alternative.
Exactly. How do you compare these outcomes using SVPD? You're trying to sum infinite positive differences for one group against infinite negative differences for another group. Again, the calculation often breaks down or becomes undefined. We lose the ability to rank futures based on the fundamental values they embody.
So these aren't just minor technical glitches. These hard cases seem to hit right at the heart of the decisions long-termism cares about, and the problem is formalized by impossibility results.
Yes. This is where mathematicians and philosophers have formally proven that you cannot create an ethical ranking system, an axiology, for infinite worlds that satisfies all the desirable properties we take for granted in finite worlds. Something has to give.
What's the core clash? Which intuitive principles become incompatible?
The most famous conflict is between weak Pareto and unrestricted anonymity. Weak Pareto seems utterly basic. If outcome B is better for at least one person and worse for no one compared to outcome A, then B is better than A. Or a stronger version. If B is better for everyone, B is better.
Seems undeniable for any welfare-based ethic. And anonymity.
Unrestricted anonymity says it doesn't matter who gets what level of well-being, only the overall distribution counts. Swapping two people's happiness levels leaves the total value unchanged. This is key to impartiality.
Right. Both seem core to impartial totalism. But you're saying they clash when dealing with infinite sets of people.
They can, in subtle ways, depending on how you structure the comparisons. You can construct scenarios where upholding one forces you to violate the other. And even if you try to weaken these principles slightly, you run into further problems.
Like the arbitrariness problem.
Exactly. Other impossibility results show that if you want a complete ordering one that can rank any two infinite outcomes while still keeping weak Pareto and some form of limited anonymity, like finite anonymity, which only applies to finite groups,
Then what happens?
then the resulting ranking system must be non-constructive.
Meaning you can't write down a finite rule or algorithm for it.
Precisely. It can't have a finite description. To fully define which infinite world is better than which other infinite world in every possible case, you need an infinite list of arbitrary, ad hoc comparison rules, what the sources call brute axiological facts. There's no underlying principle, just an infinite stack of arbitrary judgments.
That sounds completely impractical and theoretically unsatisfying. It's not really a theory anymore, just an infinite list.
Which strongly suggests that trying to force a complete ranking is the wrong approach. The unavoidable conclusion seems to be that some degree of incomparability is baked into the structure of impartial ethics when faced with infinity. Widespread incomparability, especially in the hard cases, might just be the reality.
Okay, so if pursuing this kind of impartial, risk-neutral totalism into the infinite realm leads potentially to paralysis, incomparability, and maybe even infinite arbitrary rules, well, that sounds pretty bad.
It does. And that's why many philosophers argue, look, maybe the problem isn't infinity. Maybe the problem is risk-neutral totalism itself. The risk of widespread incomparability in crucial real-world choices feels unacceptable.
which pushes people to search for alternative ethical frameworks, alternative axiologies that just don't run into these same infinitarian roadblocks. That brings us to our final section, giving up totalism the alternative escape routes.
Exactly. If totalism leads to a dead end when things get really big, what else is there? The motivation is clear. Find a system that gives practical guidance, even if it means sacrificing some of totalism's appealing features.
Okay, alternative one mentioned is pure time discounting. We touched on this, it's common in economics. How does it work ethically, and how does it solve the infinity problem?
Ethically, it means you explicitly give less moral weight to well-being that occurs further in the future, simply because it's further away. A happy life next year counts more than a happy life a million years from now.
So it directly attacks the impartiality premise of totalism.
Directly. And if you apply a significant discount rate, especially something like exponential discounting, where the value drops by a fixed percentage each year or century, then even if the future is infinite and contains bounded value at each location, the total discounted value converges to a finite number.
The infinite sum becomes finite because the later terms get multiplied by incredibly tiny discount factors.
Precisely. It's a mathematical fix. It dissolves the infinity problem by making the distant future effectively irrelevant to the total sum.
But the cost seems huge, ethically speaking. You're saying future people inherently matter less just because they live later.
That's the cost. It saves the math, but sacrifices a principle. Many find fundamental the idea that suffering is bad and happiness is good, regardless of when it occurs. It feels arbitrary to discount someone's well-being just because of their birth date. It contradicts that core long-termist intuition.
It feels like a pragmatic cheat rather than a principled solution, maybe.
Many see it that way. It solves the puzzle by changing the rules in a way that seems morally questionable to proponents of impartiality.
Okay, what's alternative two? Rejecting impartiality more broadly with agent-relative consequentialism or even non-consequentialism.
Right. This move says, forget trying to calculate the impartial, agent-neutral value of the entire universe. Morality isn't about maximizing the cosmic good from nowhere. Instead, focus on agent-relative values or duties.
Like what?
Like having stronger obligations to your own family, community, or country. Or perhaps following deontological rules like don't lie, don't murder, regardless of the total consequences. The infinite future of unknown strangers simply doesn't generate the same kind of strong moral claim on you as your immediate relationships or duties do.
This definitely avoids the infinity problem because your moral focus shrinks dramatically to the local and personal.
It does. And it aligns better, perhaps, with everyday moral intuitions. But the drawback is it potentially loses the ability to justify large-scale, impartial action needed for global challenges like climate change or preventing existential risks, which affect everyone, everywhere, including the far future. Longtermism argues you need that impartial perspective.
Makes sense. Alternative three is the narrow person-affecting view. This sounds even more restrictive.
It is. This view essentially says that an action is only good or bad if it affects people who will exist regardless of what you choose. You only count the effects on necessary people, not contingent future people whose very existence depends on your choice.
So, if my choice is between action A, which saves 100 currently existing people, and action B, which ensures 1 billion happy people exist in the future who wouldn't have existed otherwise, this view ignores the billion future people.
In its strictest form, yes. Because those future people are contingent. Their existence depends on action B. The only morally relevant outcome is saving the 100 necessary people.
That seems to gut consequentialism entirely, especially long-termism. It solves the infinity problem by just refusing to count the vast majority of potential future value.
Exactly. It avoids the math by radically shrinking the scope of moral concern in a way that strikes many as deeply counterintuitive. Don't we have some obligation concerning the well-being of the future generations we bring into existence?
You'd think so. Okay, finally, alternative four. A pragmatic policy rather than a whole new axiology. Ignoring small probabilities, sometimes called Nicolasian discounting.
This is a more targeted fix. It doesn't change the core value theory as much, but it modifies the risk neutrality premise. It says, look, when probabilities get really small, especially probabilities attached to these highly speculative infinite outcomes like supertasks or multiverse engineering.
We just treat them as zero for practical decision-making.
Essentially, yes. We set some threshold, and below that we ignore the possibility. The goal is explicitly to avoid having to grapple with the hard infinities that break SVPD. If we ignore the tiny chances of infinite predictable effects, then we're back in the realm where SVPD works fine for the remaining finite or statistically indifferent infinite parts.
So it rescues calculability, but at the cost of violating pure risk neutrality.
That's the trade-off. Risk neutrality demands we account for all probabilities, no matter how small, multiplied by their outcome values. This approach says that's impractical when infinities are involved. Let's be pragmatic and ignore the truly tiny speculative chances of infinite outcomes.
It feels like another pragmatic dodge, maybe more targeted than time discounting, but still sacrificing a principle to get a workable answer.
It is, and it raises the question of where to set that probability threshold. Is it arbitrary? Does it risk ignoring a genuinely catastrophic risk or a stupendous opportunity just because the probability is low?
So it seems every escape route has its own serious costs. You either sacrifice impartiality, time discounting, agent relativity, scope person-affecting views, or risk neutrality, ignoring small probabilities.
Which is precisely why, despite all the deep and troubling problems raised by infinity and the impossibility results, some philosophers still lean toward sticking with risk-neutral totalism, perhaps hoping that the truly problematic hard cases are rare enough in practice, or that a more sophisticated, constructive version of SVPD can eventually be found that handles them better without sacrificing core principles. It's an ongoing, difficult debate.
All right, we've been through the cosmological possibilities, the mathematical breakdowns, the rescue attempts, the hard cases, and the escape routes. Let's try to bring this deep dive together. What's the bottom line on long-termism facing the infinite?
Well, first, the kind of standard risk-neutral totalist argument for long-termism seems reasonably safe when we're talking about choices with predictably finite effects. Tools like the sum of differences in SVPD let us handle situations where the infinite background is statistically indifferent, like maybe with Boltzmann brains or just vast regions unaffected by us. Morality doesn't collapse for everyday choices.
Okay, good news there.
But the real tension, the philosophical battleground, emerges when we consider those truly long-term, high-stakes decisions. Choices about existential security, guiding deep future values, or enabling potentially transformative technologies like supertasks or multiverse exploration. These are the choices where we might face a non-zero chance of having infinite predictable effects.
And that's where the path forks dramatically.
Exactly. Path 1. If a future improved version of totalist axiology can actually make comparisons in these hard infinite cases, it probably leads to infinite fanaticism. This would make long-termism almost overwhelmingly important, as tiny probabilities of infinite outcomes would dominate all finite concerns.
Path 2. If the axiology can't resolve these hard cases, if it leads to widespread incomparability just when we need guidance most, then the totalist foundation for long-termism looks critically weakened. We might be forced to reject it.
But rejecting it means embracing one of the alternatives, each of which, as we saw, requires sacrificing other deeply held moral principles, like impartiality across time, or the importance of contingent future lives, or pure risk neutrality. There's no easy way out.
So reflecting on all this, what does it really mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of your own ethical commitments in light of these vast scales? It seems the challenge of infinity forces a fundamental choice about what we value most in an ethical theory itself.
That feels right. It boils down to a core tension. On one hand, do we prioritize maintaining impartiality at all costs, sticking to the ideal that all lives, all potential well-being matters equally, regardless of when or where it occurs, even if pursuing that ideal rigorously leads us down a path towards mathematical breakdown, non-constructive theories, potential arbitrariness, and the paralysis of incomparability in crucial moments?
Or, on the other hand, is it more important to ensure we have a functional, constructive moral theory? One that actually gives us answers, provides clear guidance, allows us to compare options and make decisions right now, especially about the long-term future, even if achieving that functionality requires making pragmatic compromises. Sacrificing some of that pure impartiality, maybe through time discounting or trimming the scope, or ignoring those vanishingly small probabilities of infinite outcomes.
Which principle can we least afford to lose? The elegant, universal scope of impartiality, even if it risks silence? Or the practical necessity of a constructive theory that works, even if it feels ethically compromised? That's the profound, maybe unanswerable question that wrestling with infinity